I did want to point out, of course, today we're doing ad edit, so we're going to be going over a little bit of the rules and regulations regarding ad editing listings and the responsibilities that come with that before we jump into the actual process of the technical explanation of ad edit. And then we're going to go over a couple different forms. So we're going to do a lot of navigating today. So if you're going to try to follow along, I would wait until I get into Matrix because the rest of this is going to be just a lot of clicking around to kind of navigate and show you guys around the different areas you can find things for tools that can help you during the ad edit process. So a couple things just to start here. Of course, I like to highlight this in all of my courses. So if you've ever attended one before, you've probably heard me say this 30 times by now, but there are a couple ways you can get to our MLS portal. Of course, when I refer to the portal, I'm referring to this page here. But there are a couple ways you can navigate to this page. Of course, you can use that direct link, which is portal.mlstechnology.com. You can also reach it via the website mlstechnology.com using this MLS login button. You can access it via the tulsarealtors.com website by using the member login button. So there's a couple different ways to get to this portal here. Today we're going to be looking mostly in Matrix, but there are a couple things I wanted to point out. The first thing we're going to look at, of course, is the responsibility regarding ad edit. So with ad edit privilege comes great responsibility. So the purpose of this class is to ensure that everyone who has ad edit functionality knows how to use the system, and it also is here to ensure that everyone who has that function is making listings that contain useful information for fellow realtors to view and make sales with. And a lot of the information that we'll be going over today is primarily focused on the technical aspect of data entry. So again, in Matrix, what we're going to be doing. So we're not going to be lingering too long on the rules and regulations portion, but that's effectively what we're going to begin with here today. So one way you can navigate to the MLS rules and regulations is via the MLS portal. There's going to be this MLS governing documents button here. When you click it, it's going to redirect you to this governing documents page. And this MLS Tech Rules and Regs section has the MLS Tech Rules and Regs link that you can click, which will redirect you to the rules and regulations for MLS. The one that I'm going to be going over is section 2.25 today. So you can either navigate there by actually clicking physically in this document, or if you have a browser that supports that, I should say, or you can use the control key on your keyboard or command if you're on a Mac and the F key at the same time to conduct a search. Again, depending on which browser you're viewing this in, you'll either have a find page pop up down here or in the top left or top right. I'm going to type in section 2.25 since that's the one that I'm going to be reviewing here before we get started. So this is where the with great power comes great responsibility comes in. Errors or omissions on listings. So MLS Tech itself shall not be liable for errors or omissions contained in the MLS. It is the responsibility of the listing participant, aka the broker, to check his or her listings. If there is an error or omission on a listing, the following actions should be taken. If central load meaning that we have entered as the MLS a listing on your behalf, you have paid us a fee, we have entered that listing for you, then the listing participant or the broker shall immediately notify MLS Tech staff of any errors for that listing. If it is broker load, meaning the agent entered it, the broker or an admin, pretty much the majority of you will be entering listings this way. The listing participant shall immediately correct his or her own listing errors. In the event that the listing participant or the broker is unable to make the necessary changes, he or she shall immediately notify MLS Tech staff in writing with an authorized signature. What that is talking about there in writing with an authorized signature is referring to our MLS change form. Now I'm going to show you where we can find that real quick. So when we go back to our portal, there is a forms and contracts button we're going to click. There is going to be MLS specific forms here. And under this MLS specific forms, you're going to see this MLS change form here. So in the event that you've entered some data into the MLS that you are unable to change because either the system is giving you an error, or maybe it's a pretty common one that occurs, and we've put something in place to protect you from entering inaccurate data, but it's just not allowing you to do so. This MLS change form can be very, very helpful for that reason. So it does have to be signed by the listing participant, meaning the broker or an authorized signer for your office. In addition to yourself, we do not require a seller signature unless it is in release or withdrawn status. In that case, we do require that seller signature. But the main signature that we're looking for in this instance is the broker or authorized signer. For us to be able to actually process the form, we'll have to see a signature from one of those two on the form. Of course, here's where you can fill in the property data for the actual property itself. And then you're going to actually choose one of these statuses that you're needing to put the listing into. And depending on which status you've chosen at the top here, you will fill out the corresponding gray box data with all of the red asterisks being filled in, because those are going to be the required fields for each status for us to make that change on your behalf. So again, some technical issues preventing you from doing it. Maybe even it's just your computer. Maybe your computer blew up or something, and you're just needing to submit one of these so we can make a change for you. You're more than welcome to do that as long as we have that broker signature and you filled out the proper required information. Then we can process that form. Otherwise, we may kick it back to you and say, hey, we need that signature, or we need a couple of more pieces of information. It will require you at that point to resubmit the form. So do keep that in mind. But that's the responsibilities that come with Add Edit. There are some additional responsibilities, of course, and we'll be going over those as we encounter them today. But again, that's all the time we're going to spend on rules and regulations and forms and all that today. Well, not forms, actually. We'll be going over a different form. But for now, we're going to actually hop right into Matrix. And we're going to go over to our Add Edit tab. In fact, let me zoom this in a bit because it's a little small. There we go. And we'll actually just be going through the process of just adding a new listing today. Now, there are a few ways that you can do this. The main thing I wanted to go over, again, we are going to be talking about a property data form here real quick before we actually jump into this. So you won't have to follow along with this portion. Here's where we want to be when we're coming to input this listing. So this next piece I'm just going to show you for your convenience. So for those of you that are familiar with it, if you've utilized Transaction Desk at all or done any work within that, we have something called a property data form. Now you can find this data form via the same process that we went through to find that change form, via forms and contracts, property data form, and then we have different property data forms depending on the type. So I'll show you again here. If we go to forms and contracts, MLS specific forms, on the right hand side is where you find that change form, but on the left we have what's called matrix data forms. These are going to be the property data forms for individual listing types. So if you're doing residential, vacant land, leasing, commercial, we have property data forms for each of those there. The important thing to note about these data forms is they're not dynamic. This means that they cannot be filled out digitally. So unless you have a program that allows you to create a dynamic field or a form or something like Adobe PDF Editor or something like that, these do not have the ability to be edited digitally by default. So that's why I'm pointing out the one that's in Transaction Desk. We do have property data forms in Transaction Desk for each status, just like you saw, residential, vacant land, commercial, and lease. But this is the residential form, and I wanted to point this out because we have a few things here that you can come through. The first is that it's dynamic, so you can actually fill this out digitally. You can take this form with you digitally to, you can take your laptop to the property with the seller, fill it out with them on site, make sure you get all the details right. There are ways you can import data automatically from MLS or from a tax ID number or anything like that to begin filling this form for you. But there are a couple things I wanted to point out with this. Of course, the street address is broken down into house number, street direction, street name, just like you'd see when you're entering a listing on Matrix. So anything that you're seeing on this property data form is going to reflect what we see when we do get into the add edit for matrix, which we're very shortly going to be in. So you'll see how this reflects. Only thing to point out here is we do have this upload listing button in Transaction Desk that will pull data from this property data form and put it into an incomplete listing in matrix for you. So you can then go in and edit that incomplete listing. We're going to talk about how to do that here towards the end of class, but I did want to point out that that is a function you can utilize here. The other thing is this coming soon status designation does not actually affect whether or not the status of the listing, if you're uploading it from Transaction Desk, is going to be coming soon or not. So you'll still need to give us a call to flip it into coming soon for you if you're wanting to do that. So just keep that in mind. And of course, it does have to be an incomplete status, meaning you cannot have submitted that listing. We're going to talk about what all that means here in a little bit, but those are a couple of options you have with this form. And of course, anything you see with an asterisk is indicated on this form is going to be something that's required or conditionally required, meaning it may be required if a different field is added that is optional. The conditional requirements will have 2 stars, meaning there may be another dependent optional field that may need to be filled out for these to then become required, but they are conditionally required. And then all of these other asterisk ones, single asterisks, are just required fields that you'll need to go in and fill. And these should correspond one-to-one to what you're going to see here in matrix. But we've got all the way down to, of course, the listing agent, authorized signer, all that, just like you'd see with any other form. So wanted to point that out before we actually hop in. Now, after we reviewed all the forms and rules and regulations and everything, we're ready to actually begin the technical aspects of entering, editing, and closing and pending listings. So first thing that we want to do here is when we come to our add edit tab, we have a couple of different options that we can do here. If we have an existing listing, we have the option to edit that listing either by typing in the MLS number here and clicking edit, or we can use this quick modify drop down to find it in the list here to then edit it. As you can tell, if I were to, let's say I were to have used that property data form in Transaction Desk and I chose to hit that upload listing button, it's going to give me an MLS number, again, that I can either type in, or I can use this quick modify drop down. Anything with an I is an incomplete status, meaning it's a draft of a listing. It hasn't been submitted, it's just saved. I'm actually going to pull up this incomplete listing here for a moment just to show you what happens. Perfect. And then we have the option to go back into the property data form here, which is always going to be the name of the type of listing that you have. So residential, vacant land, commercial, so on and so forth, and an active next to it. So that's going to be our property data form. When we click that, that's where we can come in and edit the details. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel that for now. Just wanted to give you a quick preview of that. But for now, we're going to go ahead and hit this add new button. And we're going to just add a test listing here. So I'm going to choose a residential coming soon listing for now. This is where you do have the option to delineate if you want to do an active or coming soon listing. This is the point in which if you had imported an incomplete listing and it's still in that incomplete status and you wanted to flip it back and forth, we have the freedom to do that for you as long as it's in that incomplete status. It's very important that you are careful about what you're submitting. And when you're asking us for assistance, because after something has been submitted, our ability to assist gets limited very, very greatly. So for now, I'm going to just choose this coming soon so we can see all the fields that are possible in a residential listing. And then it takes us to this first section here, where we have the option to either fill from cross property, fill from tax, or start with a blank listing. Now, fill from cross property means we can conduct a search to see if the property, the subject property that we're listing, has ever been entered in the MLS before. If it has a prior MLS number, maybe we already know what that MLS number is, we can input that MLS number here and click this fill from button. What that is going to effectively do is import any dynamic fields from that previous listing, including the remarks, and create a template for us to then go through and quality check, if you will, to make sure all of the data is accurate. So it's a very easy shortcut that you can use to get a lot of data very quickly, like stuff like that won't change, like the address or something like that, and then go in and edit the data that does change, such as the public remarks. I don't have an example to pull from today, so I'm going to go over this next section. Fill from tax. Here again, we can do a public records search in MLS to see if we can find any matrix public record data for the property that we have. And we can fill from that tax parcel ID. If we have already looked at it in Realist, a lot of the things that we actually suggest when we're doing add edit, the first step when you're setting up a listing is verifying that the owner is the person that you're working with. And so if you've already hit Realist up to see if the owner is that person that owns the property, the person that you're talking to, then you may already have the tax parcel ID. You can come in here. It will autofill a lot of the tax parcel and legal information from that assessor's record in Realist. So again, something for you to go through and quality check. But because I want to show you the process from start to finish, we're going to choose this start with a blank listing option today. But I did want to highlight, of course, you have a couple of different options you can utilize there. So now at the top, we see the property type that we've chosen in this case, which is residential, and the status that we've chosen, which in this case is coming soon. So now at this phase, if at any point I wanted to save my changes or anything, we have some floating buttons here at the bottom that are going to follow me along every tab that I go through. And I wanted to highlight and point those out to you real quick. So this first one here is save as incomplete. Now this is where, again, we're just saving the listing as a draft. It's not getting submitted. It's not being put on MLS. It's just being saved as an incomplete. And as long as it's in an incomplete status, we can, again, help you modify just about anything. Even without a change form, we can come in here and assist you with it in most cases. Once we hit this submit listing button is when things get serious. It's live on the MLS in whatever status you've chosen. So make sure you've quality checked it first. The other one is this validate button. When we click validate, what this is going to do is it's going to give us essentially a checklist of items that we need to go through and verify are correct, number one, and number two, have been filled in. So these are going to highlight all the required fields, which by default, all the required fields are highlighted in yellow, you'll notice. So there are some tax parcel numbers and some street directions, some house size fields here that are not considered required fields. They are optional, and so those won't be highlighted by the validate button, and they definitely won't be in yellow. But the validate button will highlight whenever a tab hasn't been completed as well. So even if there's a individual field in one of these areas that needs correction or needs to be filled in, that is the point at which you would go in and make that correction. So let's go through a little bit of this first page here, and then we're going to kind of talk about each tab of this add edit function. Of course, at any point, if you need to step away from the process of editing this listing, you can go ahead and hit save as incomplete. When you do this, what it's essentially going to do is assign an MLS number to this listing. At that point that it has been saved as incomplete, that MLS number will not change. So once you submit that listing, make sure you're not using an incomplete listing from years past, because that MLS number may be reflecting a past year or something in the, because our MLS numbers are actually done by year. So you have this year is 23, of course. So all of our MLS numbers start with 23 and then count up from there. So if you were to, for example, save as an incomplete today and come back to edit it January 1st of next year, that MLS number is going to start with a 23, even if you submit it. So that's something to keep in mind. But we have had a couple of listings with dates this year that started in like 18 or, something like that. But their list date was January 1st of this year or something like that. So, so those MLS numbers do stick with the listing once it's saved as incomplete. And the reason for that is so that you can get back in and edit it whenever you need to. But the first thing, again, that you'll see here is the same thing we saw on that property data form. The house, the actual street address is going to be the address of the property is going to be broken up into house number, street direction, street name, street type, post direction, and unit. So here you'll need to go in and fill out some data. So for example, I'll just quickly fill in some items here. So when we get to the street name field, you'll notice there's a couple areas on this first page too that are important to note. We don't have the option to type in this field. So I'm clicking. There's no, I can't type. So the street name, to avoid misspellings or errors or even improper duplications of an address, misrepresentations, we've chosen to use an autofill feature so that you'll have to hit autofill street name and it'll pull up this search where you can conduct a search for the street. Once you find your street name, you can hit fill. If you notice that you have a street name that's not appearing in the search, please give us a call. At that point, we can get it added for you as long as we can verify that that address is correct and exists. That may involve us doing a quick realist search or Google search, but one way or the other, if we can verify the street exists, we'll get it added. It's not a very stringent requirement or anything. But once we've hit all that in and we filled it out, when we hit this validate button again, you'll notice that the red caution tags have gone away here. These are considered filled properly, and we can move on to our next row. Now, the same that's true with the street is true with our subdivision. We do have the autofill subdivision feature again to avoid errors, misspellings, those types of things. Again, if you notice that there's a subdivision in here that isn't appearing, then we can validate that it exists in Realist. As long as it exists there and we can find a tax record for it, we'll generally just add it to the system for you because we'll have all the data from that record that we need. But should we be unable to find it in the system, and maybe you yourself are as well, we may request a filed plat, which is the one that basically the plat for the subdivision that has all the signatures and everything on it, saying it's been through the county and all that, to get that subdivision added. Now, a couple of things about searching here too. When we're searching for street names or subdivisions, in this case, maybe we don't know the full legal subdivision name or the addition name. So we can enter what part we do know. So for this example, I know that Mary is somewhere in there. And we can either add an asterisk to the end or the beginning or both. And what the asterisk is indicating is it's Mary with something else after it. The asterisk before would be something maybe before it, but Mary's definitely in there. So I don't know exactly if Mary's at the beginning or end of the subdivision name. I know that it includes Mary, that's it. So I'm going to go ahead and put asterisks on either side. And then when I run this search, we'll see all of the additions that have Mary in them that could qualify. And I don't see the one that I'm looking for on this first page. So then we can move on to page 2. There it is. Okay, so we're looking for this second addition here. Perfect. So we can then find it, click fill. And when we do, you'll notice that lots of other data has now been filled in for us as well. So if you've got the subdivision name, very helpful. It's going to fill in the township, range, and section for you, the county and the city, and in some cases, the school district as well. So now we've skipped a bunch of steps. If it's a property that doesn't have a subdivision, maybe you're selling vacant land, maybe you're selling, something and it's just not within any subdivision. We do have a delineation for that. So when we hit autofill subdivision, again, we can pull up the search. What we're going to do is the county name followed by a space, the letters CO followed by a space, and unplatted. So in this case, since it's in Tulsa County, for example, we would do Tulsa CO, and now you'll see it's going to pull up that result, Tulsa space CO space unplatted. So the county name, space CO space unplatted for properties that do not have a subdivision, because this is a required field. So it will not let you submit the listing until it gets filled in. So we've included a unplatted option for each county in our MLS. So, and then we're going to fill in the rest of this data here. 54. So when you're providing the year built, it's important to note that we do require a source. Now, in this case with the year built, we can cite the owner as a source for the property. So even if we don't have a reliable source like the appraiser, builder, or courthouse, we will consider the owner as a source for the year built option. In this case, it comes from the courthouse records, so I'm going to go ahead and define that. And then we can choose our zip code, grade school, which in this case, I believe is Hoover. High school's Hale. Now, the legal description field is one that we've gotten a lot of calls on in the past, so I want to take a little bit of time to go over this here, not too much, but essentially everything in the legal description field has to be on a single line. So there can be no pressing of the enter key in this field to go to a new line. Everything needs to be on a single line. So what we generally recommend is putting it into the notepad program on your computer or something like that to make sure it's all on a single line, and then copy and paste it. Now, if it's something where you've put a lot of information in here, but it carries down to the second line, as long as it was all on a single line, it will begin to wrap it to fit it in the field. So I'm just going to type some mumbo jumbo in here. See, as I'm typing, it's going to a new line, but I'm not pressing the enter key. So all this is okay. This is acceptable. Well, not literally what I've typed is acceptable, but you get the point. So moving down to the next line, using the enter key is not allowed in this field. There's a lot of people that will get errors and get stuck on there because it won't submit or validate. And that is because what you have in there is not on a single line. So when we hit validate here, for example, it's going to take that. But if we did this and then press our enter key and did this is where it will not accept it. Yeah, so we'll get an error. So it's important to note no carriage returns is what that's referring to. At any point, if you're unsure of what should go into a field or why you're getting an error, there are these little helpful tooltips that we very carefully have gone through and tried to add for everyone so that we can avoid confusion with that. It will tell you in here that the legal text cannot contain carriage returns. And then some general field help will just kind of tell you a little bit more about what type of information based on our rules and regulations is allowed in that field. So you have both your technical description of the field and your rules and regulations requirement descriptions of those fields. The legal description, for example, we do at minimum require either the county or the subdivision and the township range and section, I believe. So that would be something that you'd put in there. So I'll just do that for mine. We'll hit validate. And then of course, now you can see we're done with this first section. Once we go through and we actually fill out the rest of this, I'm going to go ahead and quickly go through some of this here. Of course, your list date should be the day that ideally the day that the property is listed, but ideally you're listing the property the day that the listing agreement has been signed. So technically speaking, the list date should reflect the date of the listing agreement. But if the listing is being entered today and the agreement was signed yesterday, you have 24 hours to enter a listing once the agreement has been signed. I shouldn't say 24 hours. You have 1 business day. So even if you signed it at 10 p.m. on, which would be really late, but 10 p.m. on today, you'd have until, whenever the next day to get that in. If you signed it at 12 a.m. July 12th, then you would have till July, 12 a.m. You get the point. But so it's 1 business day. Your expiration date can go up to a year out from the original list date. So even if that expiration date needs to be modified forward, it can. Modified backward, it can. You're good on that. but it's important to know it's 365 days. And since we're hitting a leap year in 2024, if you're putting it for a year out, it may be 7/10, for example, is 1 year from, is 365 days from this list date, for example. So it might be important to keep that in mind as well. Some limitations there. This next part pertains specifically to the coming soon status, which is the reason that I've chosen that status today. So this is again where we get into some stickiness with the rules and regulations regarding coming soon. We want to make sure that we have accurate data here and that people understand what these fields are indicating. So the showing start date is different from the list date because it's the date that the listing goes active. So from coming soon to active. Now this date is only allowed to go up to 10 days out from the list date. So you can only go up to the 21st in this example. Now you can go up to 10 days and you can extend that as far as up to 10 days as well. So let's say you decided the showing start date was going to be Friday, but then your client wasn't ready till after the weekend. Well, you can move it up to that Monday. That's acceptable. What we can't do with the showing start date is move it back. So if it is set to a particular day, let's say Friday the 14th, we cannot make it Thursday the 13th once it's submitted. So this is where it becomes very important for you to quality check yourself, as I like to say, and verify that the date that you're entering in this category is a fair representation of what's on that showing, what's on that coming soon contract, so coming soon seller authorization form, excuse me. And there will be language reflecting those rules and regulations that we have regarding the showing start date in that form as well for you to review with your client. So if they're trying to make the push, you can say, hey, look, you signed this, you know, this is the date that we're adherent to. Multiple parcels means you can have multiple parcels on one listing, of course. So what we're getting into with that, of course, is modifying the showing start date cannot be moved backward from its original submission date. So if you submit this on the 17th, you're locked in for the 17th or later up to the 21st. So home square footage, we can quote as many of, let's say we are selling multiple parcels here, we can quote as many of those square foot sources as we want. But unlike with the year built, the owner is not a reputable source that we allow here. So you have to do one of the 3 required sources that are here. Either appraiser, building permit, or courthouse are the only acceptable options for this home square foot source. If we were to choose not reporting, which is what you'd have to choose if you do not have a square foot source, when you choose not reporting, it's married to a 0 in this field. So you would have to then put a 0 for the home square foot. So just keep that in mind. You'll want to get a reputable source for that square foot number, or else you'll have to do not reporting and put 0 in there. So just keep that in mind. So we're going to do courthouse is our record. We have 2,000 square feet. And then we're going to quickly fill all this in. And when we hit our validate now, we'll see that our property info is almost complete. The last thing that we have to fill out is our map information. Now with the map, you can choose this get lat long from address option. By doing so, it's just going to place a pin on this map as a guesstimate of where that property is based on its address and what it can pull up from Google. And then it will autofill this latitude and longitude, which are the required fields here for the mapping. Now it's very important for you to quality check this as well. And the way that you can do that is by clicking the set lat long manually option. You can grab this pin, drag it around, drop it wherever is the most accurate representation. This is especially important in vacant land scenarios where you're trying to grab that pin data. You can drop that here. You can also jump to an address on the map to then place the pin somewhere else. So, you know, there's a lot of different options here that you can utilize in this feature. You can zoom in, zoom out, just like you would with any other map, add layers if you need to help you find particular property area lines, things like that. But once you've got that pin in an accurate location, luckily mine did pull directly where it needed to be, so I can hit done. Then we can hit validate here. Now we're done with this section. So section 1 complete. We can move on to step 2. But as you can see, as we're hitting validate here, at any point, these buttons are going to follow us along. So when we go to our next section in the rooms area here, these buttons are following us. So we can always save as incomplete to come back to this later if we need to. But I'm very quickly going to try to get through the rest of these tabs here, because we're going to then talk about how to actually edit a listing once we've submitted it, and then how to put it into a pending status as well, and all the responsibilities that come with that as well. But I wanted to point out with each of these tabs, as you'll see, any fields that you need to fill out are going to be highlighted, but some of these fields will be conditional. So if we add a room down here, for example, we can add a kitchen and add some description for that. Well, if we come down here and hit validate, well, now we've suddenly got a new required field. It was previously optional because we didn't have anything in this field. But now that we've come through and added something here, it has become conditionally required. So this is where on that property data form, you'll see those 2 asterisks next to level. And that's because it's only required if you're filling out a particular room. In this case, we've added the kitchen, but we can come in and add each bedroom, each room. Highly recommend that you do this. Because what this is going to do is allow your property to be much more dynamic and discoverable in different types of searches as well. So if someone's doing keyword searches or room searches, your property is going to have dynamic info, and it's going to appear in those searches. So you want to try to, include as much detail here as you can. This level option is also very helpful for those that may be handicapped or struggling with ways to navigate. Knowing homes that have a single layer, or a single level, I should say, they're going to be more enticed to go for something like that. So this is a good way for you to increase your range of marketability as well. So we're going to quickly fill this out here. 1.5. Okay, and again, once we hit that validate button, once we have all of our required fields input, that caution tag goes away at the top and next to all those fields that are required. Okay, there's a few things that I want to talk about on this particular tab here when we get into the broker disclosure finance warranty section. As you can tell, we've got a lot of caution flags here. That validate button is doing us a good service here by letting us know all the things we're going to need to come through and fill out. This first one I want to talk about is internet list. So this essentially is just letting you know, hey, do you want this to syndicate out to Zillow, Trulia, Realtor.com? If you set this option to yes, then of course that listing will syndicate. But if you have a particular option or a listing or a client who doesn't want their property to be marketed in that way, you can avoid the internet list option altogether by clicking no. This address public is slightly married to the internet list option. So some public sites will not pick up the syndication for your particular property if this address public option is set to no. However, you can do internet list yes and address public no. That will still allow the listing data to syndicate out just without displaying the address for the property. But it is important to note there are some public sites that will not pull that listing at all if the address is not one of the fields that you're providing to them. So those two are really helpful in lots of ways. Allow comments and reviews, again, just is something if you are syndicating out, whether or not you want to actually allow users to make comments or reviews on that particular property. Allow AVM is one that we talk about a lot here, and I wanted to take a little time to highlight that too. AVM stands for Automated Valuation Model, and things like that are popular, like the Zillow's estimate, stuff like that, are going to give a value number to your property, a dollar value to your property based on an algorithm that they use called an AVM. And you can choose to allow that for the life of the listing or not. So as long as this listing is online, you can either allow that to be included on those public facing sites or not. And once the property has gone through the process of being sold and you've closed and now that's gone, that AVM option means nothing anymore. It can be used as a comparable. So any of that public facing data, that sale data, can be used as a comparable at that point. This does not affect a property's ability to be utilized as a comparable. It only affects it for the life of the listing. So that AVM number can be really helpful or harmful depending. So you may want to come in and adjust that. There's a couple of other things here that we wanted to talk about. The OREC disclosure type. So if you choose disclaimer or disclosure in this field, we are going to require that you have that on your listing within 24 hours. So we want to see that uploaded to your listing within 24 hours. If we do not, there are occasions where we've given leeway and maybe an additional day or two, just depending. But if we do not see it within a reasonable amount of time, you could be subject to a fine. This is a finable offense. So definitely make sure that when you choose disclaimer or disclosure that you have the forms to back that up. Now, if you have a property that's exempt from such a thing, maybe it's new construction or something like that, you can choose the exempt option, and then our system will not check for those disclosures. However, if it's inexempt improperly, there are exemption forms that you will have to include as well. And so we will check and see why it's an exempt. And if we do not see it in exempt for the right reason, that can also result in a fine. So please be mindful of this disclosure type. It is something that NAR mandates, so we do have to abide by. Your listing agreement type is here. You can also fill that in. The only forms that we actually require you to upload to the listing, though, is the disclosure. So we don't require you to upload the listing agreement. We do require you to be able to provide that agreement to us should we request it from you. So you'll need to have it, but it won't have to be uploaded to the listing. If that makes sense. The other thing I wanted to talk about on this particular page is this lender-owned field. So lately we've been getting a lot of questions about this, specifically when it comes to Zillow. Zillow interprets the lender-owned field as being in foreclosure. So if this is marked to yes, then when it does syndicate over to Zillow, then that field is going to be interpreted as in foreclosure. So that's how they will display that when it gets to that site. So important to note that if it's not lender owned, go ahead and put it no. If it is lender owned, then conditionally you may want to talk with your client about how that should be listed or reflected in the listing. So HOA info. So there's only one required field here. However, if you do mark this yes, and we hit validate here, you'll notice other fields become conditionally required at that point. Like they'll need to include the HOA fee and the amenities that come with that HOA. But if we hit no and we validate, then those fields go away. Construction, land area, this is all just going to be about the actual elements of the property, the different actual features and amenities and different add-ons, things like that. The actual style of the home is included here. So that's a very helpful marketable tab there. Moving on, we've got the energy and green info, much like the construction area. Again, we're going over some actual features of the home or the property. And then this last section is where I'm going to spend a little time as well talking about the actual remarks on the property. So public remarks, according to our rules and regulations, should be reserved for descriptions of the property and the neighborhood of the property only. So we don't want contact information. We don't want contract information in here. No finance information in here. The public remarks field is for the description of the property. Anything else regarding finance or contract or contact info for the agent, for yourself or for the broker, or maybe even how to access the property, things like that. If it's not owner occupied and you want to include just some go and show info, all that can be reserved for realtor remarks because this is data that does not get syndicated out to public facing sites and will not be included in public facing comparables. So realtor remarks is where you want to put all that extra data. And then your directions field here, we do require turn-by-turn directions, which means if we see use GPS in here and only use GPS, you may be subject to a violation on that. So it's important to note, we will catch that. We will send you a notice. So definitely be sure to include turn-by-turn directions. Now, if you want to include some nice turn-by-turn directions and then at the end tag on use GPS or something like that, we're not going to come down on you for that. That's fine. You can have that language in here as long as it's not the only language in here. All right, and then there's firm only remarks and things down here that you can further do for just your firm. But once we're done, it looks like we're ready. Should I have gone through and filled all this in, when I hit my validate, then those tags would go away. It would say we're ready to submit. At that point, we can go ahead and submit that listing. So It's always worth going through and doing a double check for all your quality checking purposes and things like that. But other than that, that's the majority of what you're going to be doing there. And when we hit save as incomplete in this example here, again, this is what it's going to look like. It's been successfully saved. I have an MLS number here. So I haven't completely filled all my stuff in, but I'm stepping away to do something else now. So I have an MLS number that I can jot down and come back to edit at any point. Or it also, when I come back to this add edit section here, I can use this quick modify drop down. And of course, here is the property that I just entered. So I can go back in here and begin or continue editing it from that point. If you have an incomplete listing that you need to get rid of, you would just come into that incomplete listing here and choose this delete incoming status listing to get rid of that draft. You have the power to do that yourself, but we can assist you as well should we need to do that. Again, as long as a listing is an incomplete status, we have a lot of capabilities to help you out because it's still on the technical input side, so we can support all day with those. But once we're in live listing status, then we've got some regulations and things like that that go into it. So it's very important that if you do make a mistake in submitting a listing early, give us a call right away. It's something that we definitely want to take care of for you. But now I want to talk about actually editing and accessing those listings. So I've talked about how to access and edit those listings from this add edit section. But let's say we have an active listing and we need to make it pending, or we need to make adjustments on some data or things like that. I want to talk a little bit about that and how we can do that today. So the first thing is you can access listings in your different statuses, either via this quick modify option or the MLS number that I've talked about here, but there's another place you can go as well. If we hover over my matrix and we go to my listings here, I lost it, goodness gracious. We have this drop down at the top here that allows us to see our active, pending, coming soon, expiring soon, listings without photos, incompletes, sold listings, and then we have off market as well. Off market includes both released and withdrawn. And it will only include those listings for 2 years past the date that they've been in that status. So if those off market listings, if you're needing to make an edit to a withdrawn listing, or you're just needing to see the history for that released listing, that's where you can find those. Did want to note that for you as well. For our purposes, I'm going to go to my active listings, which I have pulled up here, and I'm going to go into this listing. And from this point, we actually have the option to see a lot of different things, like we have access to our reverse prospect data, different things for our individual listings, manage photos. All this stuff is directly baked in for us to go in here, but this is where we're going to actually hit our edit button. So at this point, I'm wanting to go ahead and pin this listing. Well, when I click edit, it's going to take me right back into that modify listing form. I can also get there via the add edit quick modify tab if I need to. So there's a couple different ways you can do it, as with anything we do. But once we're here, we have the option to change into different statuses. So we can change into active with contingent, meaning we're basically under contract, but we're still accepting offers for whatever reason. We can change to pending, we can change to withdrawn, or we can change to released. So when we hit this change to pending, there's going to be 3 fields, and only 3 fields that we require to make this listing pending. First is going to be the pending date, which is just the date that this went under contract. So we're going to say we're going to say it's today, the 11th. The second one here is the anticipated closing date. Now, this is the other big area that we find on here. So you definitely want to be very, very careful about this. This anticipated closing date is not the same as the expiration date. Once a listing goes into a pending status, there is no expiration date for it. It is definitive, which is what this anticipated closing date then becomes, right? This is when you believe that it will close. Now, we know that things happen and things can take quite a while. We've seen some listings being pending for a year, maybe 2, just because of all the contract details that need to get worked out before it gets closed. And that's why it's important to keep this number updated. So if for some reason we reach the date of the anticipated closing date and you're still in that pending status and you haven't updated this date or you haven't modified it to closed, at that point, you can receive a fine. Now, we'll give you several warnings. We warn for up to 30 days before we actually issue you a fine. You'll get 30 days worth of warnings minimum, maybe even more depending on the scenario. So 1 month past this anticipated closing date, you're going to get a fine. So you definitely want to make sure you come in here and update this. So you're subject to additional fines as well for each additional time you don't update it. So please keep that in mind. It's very, very important. And then, of course, the last required information is the actual selling agent. If it's just yourself, you can find a selling agent, put your own info in there. But yeah, this is going to be, again, a field that you'll want to probably choose to autofill from by conducting a search using this find a selling agent option. Because it doesn't always go by their license number. It actually, their selling associate ID is referring to their login ID. So you may have to actually find a selling agent to do that. But once we did, we could hit validate. It would let us know all is well. We can submit listing, and at that point, we'll be in pending. I'm not going to go ahead and do that for this one, but should we need to do that, we can. Now, once we're in pending, we have limited access to our property data form at that point, which is this option up at the top here for things that we can edit. So if there's changes to compensation, for example, or things like that, where we need to come in here and, actually edit that data, we'll first have to change it into an active status and then come into the residential active section and actually make the changes that we need. So did want to point that out as well. But once we're in that pending status as well, there will be a field that appears here. Excuse me, there will be a bit of text that appears here, a button for you to click or a link for you to click to actually update the anticipated closing date. So once you've gone into a pending status and you come in to make an edit, you can actually quickly access the anticipated closing date from this list as well. It will appear for you there. The other option, of course, is even though you're in pending, this change to pending will stay there. So you can come in and click change to pending, update the anticipated closing date here, and then hit submit. So there's a couple different ways to do it. If at any point, whether it be uploading disclosures, which is a finable offense if you do not do it within a certain amount of time, updating the anticipated closing date, yet another finable offense. If at any point you have issues doing those things or making changes to your listing for any reason, and you want to represent the most accurate data possible as the agent for your client, as the MLS, our interest is to make sure that everything is fair and equal and that all of our data is accurate. So we're going to do whatever we can to assist you in getting that fixed. But please give us a call as soon as you notice an issue. It is the responsibility of the brokerage and the broker, specifically the participating member of the office, to quality check the data. So if there is an error that is noticed, or please notify either us or your broker so that we can get that fixed immediately for you. The further that we go with errors, the harder it becomes for us to maintain accurate data. So don't wait a week to let us know that your ACD is incorrect. We definitely want to fix that for you right away. When all is said and done, though, adding and editing is a fairly straightforward process. You have a lot of helpful tools to guide you along, like the property data form, things like that. And of course, you can call us anytime with any questions that you have, either about that form, about disclosures, about how to upload. We'll assist you with whatever we can when it comes to that. The last thing I wanted to touch on here before we finish up is, again, you can always print those forms anytime you need them from these forms and contracts section. We offer different types of forms that are going to be great for you to use during the process of your listing transaction as well, both in Transaction Desk and this section here. Of course, in Transaction Desk, you're going to find dynamic versions of all of these forms. So you have the option to fill them out digitally or have them sent to be signed by your client as well, all in the same program. So that's a very helpful tool. We do have a class on it as well that I would encourage each of you to sign up for. But here we have the residential contract and supplemental agreements. This is where you can find disclosures and different types of sales contracts, all the different types of things that you may need for your property there. But there are property disclosure forms on Transaction Desk as well. And then these MLS specific forms, again, where you can go to find that property data form. You can come to find this MLS change form, which is, again, If there is a change that needs to be made to an actively live listing, whether it's in pending or whatever status you're in, this MLS change form may be required for us to make that change. Again, when it's an incomplete, we have a lot of options for you from the technical side. We can consider it just a technical input error or data, whatever program thing, educational purposes. But once a listing is live, that MLS change form is going to be required in just about every instance. I don't know of an instance that we haven't required it. So if you should need any assistance getting to these forms or figuring out how to do an ad edit or having us help walk you through certain aspects of things, you can always give us a call. Our number's actually at the bottom of the site too, so I'm going to navigate back here. This is our number. You can always give us a call at that number anytime you need to. We also have an email address that you can reach us at. It's support@mlstechnology.com. You can send us an email there and we'll respond as well. Does anybody have any final questions before we finish up class here? We've got about a minute left in this class before we're done. So if anyone has any questions or anything, leave it open. But if not, if I could just get everyone to raise their hand for me to finish out the class. Appreciate you guys. Yes, perfect. All right, that's everybody. I'll go ahead and lower your hands. Well, we thank you guys for attending so much. Again, if you need to sign up for any future classes, head over to the portal section. You'll find our education section down here where you can register for classes. We've now started including both in-person and webinar courses on the same page. So I think maybe we always did and I was just confused. So that's on me, but you can always hit this register for classes to see what we've got coming up down the pipe as well. So thank you guys for attending, but everyone else, unless you have any other questions, I'll stick around for a few minutes here, but you're free to head out, and we really appreciate you guys. Have a wonderful day.